Hello, my name is Miranda. I am a 2D artist and illustrator. I started designing postcards every year for the holidays. This time I thought it would be fun if I showed you a step-by-step tutorial on how I do it. I think postcards are a great gift idea this time of year, and it's a great way to share your art with people you know. You can send these to friends, family, even coworkers. So yeah, I'm going to show you in detail how I illustrate a postcard in Procreate and then how I get the piece ready for print. Alright, first steps. Coming up with an idea. It's important that I have a solid idea before even touching the canvas. The past couple years I've illustrated scenes with little creatures in the wilderness, with snow and trees and branches being a motif in them, so I'm going to keep going with that theme this year. I like to look on Pinterest for inspiration. Unfortunately, the past year or so, Pinterest hasn't been the most reliable source, at least if you're someone who wants to avoid AI-generated images as much as possible. So I would recommend being careful which images you pick to use for inspiration. Be mindful and always look to see if there is credit to the original artist. I also like to look up photography. I think it's a great way to figure out your color schemes and have a reference from life. Okay, so after some digging, here are some images I pulled together. I saw this photo of an eastern bluebird and I was immediately drawn to this one. I can imagine a few birds sitting on some branches holding a ribbon of some kind. Okay, now I move on to thumbnailing and rough sketch. I usually go for 3 or 5 thumbnails to rough out an idea that feels right in my head. I knew I wanted to go with a bird for this illustration, but I went ahead and roughed out a few other ideas. Maybe I would have a winter scene with a bird chatting with a fox or horse, or birds decorating a Christmas tree. But I was really stuck on something a little more close up, so I went with my third thumbnail. Maybe in the future I'll revisit the others. In terms of composition, I want to include some text on the front, so I will work my composition around that. I like the emptiness in the photographs I picked. It creates this sense of whimsy that I want to emulate for my illustration. So I plan to leave the background relatively simple and use the 2 birds and branches to frame the composition. I also want to add a ribbon element somewhere to help guide the viewer along the piece. It's good to also sketch out the back of the card. I plan to repeat the same background with some branches and the ribbon to tie the 2 scenes together. However, I can be a bit lazy and wait until I'm done painting to work on the back. You just need to take into account where you want the stamp to go, a divider, and some space for someone to write their address. You'll see what I mean later in this video. If I need to, I also will make some color comps to go with my thumbnails. These usually help iron out what colors I want to use on a smaller scale. I then create a second sketch on top of this one where I have a cleaner idea of what I want the shapes and lines to look like. Sometimes I'll color in shapes to get a better idea of form. In this case, I colored in the branches and leaves. I didn't record this part, but here's a picture of my final sketch before I move on to setting up my canvas to begin painting. For this part, I'm going to create a screen recording so it's a little bit easier to see. My next step is setting up my canvas for the final version. It's important that you know the standard card sizes that printers often use when making these products. If you are printing online, I recommend looking up the sizes that the printing services provide. So there are 2 important things to consider when setting up your canvas size: pixel and DPI resolutions. For those who might not know, pixel resolution is the number of pixels on your canvas. The larger amount of pixels you have, the more detail you can get. In this case, I want to create a 6x4 inch postcard, so I will change the units to inches and change that here. Alright, the next thing you want to look for is the DPI. DPI stands for dots per inches. The higher the DPI, the larger the number of ink dots the printer sees on an image. This means you'll have much clearer and more detailed results for your prints in the end. 300 DPI is a good standard to go by when you're printing, but you could also go higher when you're working on larger paintings. I sometimes get these mixed up. Just remember that pixels measures the resolution of the digital image, while DPI measures the resolution of the printed image. It's important that you always start with a large canvas size because you won't run into blurriness or pixelization issues down the road. A good rule of thumb is to always start large so you can shrink your images later. Never start small and try to increase the size because your image will get blurry. Before I go any further, I also wanted to touch briefly on color profiles. On Procreate, if you look under Dimensions and click Color Profile, you'll see that you have a few options. For me personally, I always make sure to select RGB when I am painting something digitally. RGB uses the most range of colors that show up on digital displays, and CMYK is used when you're printing. Sometimes after I'm done painting, I'll change the color profile to CMYK when I'm ready to start printing. I won't go too deep into it, I just wanted to bring it up. Alright, now I click OK, or Create. So I have my canvas here. I also want to include bleed lines right from the beginning, so I'm more prepared later when I set things up for printing. A bleed line is basically an inch of extra space along the edges of your illustration that makes sure the printer doesn't cut off any important parts while printing. You can extend your paint past the bleed line, but it's important to not add any important stuff there. For Procreate, there are a couple ways to do this. For this video, I'm going to show you the grid tool method. First, I want to add an extra ½ inch to my canvas. I go to Actions, Canvas, Crop, and Resize. I'll then go to Settings and change the units to 6.5 inches by 4.5 inches. Okay, and make sure to toggle on snapping when centering the canvas so each side is equal. Okay, now done. Then I will go to Actions, Canvas, and toggle on Drawing Guide. You'll see that a square grid appears on your screen. To edit the size of these squares, you'll need to click Edit Drawing Guide. You'll see the settings here on the bottom. Click the 2D grid and then grid size here. And I want a ½ inch, so I will change the units to inches and then ½ inch, or 0.5. You can trace those lines, and there you go. You can see here the red area is where my 6x4 inch image will go. I call this the live area, or you can call it the safe zone. The blue is the extra ½ inch of space where the printer will be cutting off the edges of the paper. So that's essentially what bleed lines are there for. Now that I have everything set up, I can begin painting. I will start with the background color first. I usually lower the opacity of the sketch, and then underneath I will fill the whole canvas with a color. I always start with a wash over the entire canvas. It's a good way to neutralize the values a bit, and it also unifies your colors and adds a little bit of randomness going forward. I always try to approach my digital paintings like I would oil paint or gouache. Traditional artists use this technique often when they start painting. I'll use a variety of brushes to add broad strokes and color to the background. Looking at my reference here, I'd like to replicate the fuzzy softness going on. The light pink and oranges are quite beautiful here, and it'll create more emphasis on the birds once I get to them. Okay, now I will move on to base colors. There are many ways I've done this step. It's really up to you and what you're most comfortable with. You could use the lasso tool and block in the different colors with shapes, or you can outline the shapes and drop in color to fill them in, or just casually color everything in like a coloring book. I often flip-flop between these different methods. It really depends on what I feel like doing in the moment. Putting everything in their own layer gives me more control, so I decided to separate the birds, branches, berries, and ribbon onto their own layer. It can be quite chaotic, but it works. Okay, here's what the painting looks now with all the base colors filled in. With rendering, I start by going on top of my base colors and adding more detail to the birds, using the same method as before. The white underbelly, orange chest, the eyes, and so on. I repeat the same thing for the second bird, this time adding more detail onto the wings. One of my favorite things to do when rendering is shifting the hues. Without changing the value or saturation of the color, I will slightly shift the color to warm or cool tones. I think it creates really interesting variations and harmonizes things. Sometimes I'll also increase the saturation in some areas. This is a fun way to add a pop of color and also create some emphasis where I want it. In the areas where there is more light hitting the leaves, I will shift the green color more orange or yellow. Areas where there is less light, I'll shift green more purple or blue. I try not to blend the colors too much. Instead, I will add less pen pressure where I want the color to taper off into the next. It creates a more gestural look to the rendering that I like. If I do blend, I usually go for the soft blend brush or Eagle Hawk brush. I don't want to blend things too much because I want the birds and branches to really come forward in this piece. Keeping the background blurred and soft really sells the illusion that you are looking really close to these guys. For the berries, I want a different kind of texture, something that is more smooth and translucent. You'll see that I add a whitish shine on top layer of the berries to create that effect. I also add a little bit of pink to the berries to try and sell the idea that a little bit of light is shining through from underneath. You'll see a little later that I also add texture to the feathers by using my 6B pencil brush. I create this scratching motion with my pen to create the illusion of feathers. I kind of do the same thing for the branches because I want to capture all the twists and knobs you can see when looking up close. I will continue to color pick the base colors and shift my saturation values and hue bars until the rendering looks good. So yeah, that's pretty much what I do throughout the whole piece. Alright, here's the final painting. I'm really happy how it turned out. The colors are nice and bright. And I think the birds are really cute. Once I started adding in the snowflakes, it really came together. I think it made the scene feel very festive. Now I'm going to show you what I did for the back of the card. Just a really quick speed paint here. All I did was reuse the branches and leaves from the front and maneuver them around until it looked nice. And I also boxed in an area where there's some space to write a little note and your address and for the stamp. So I currently don't have the fanciest printer or supplies here at home, but I wanted to show you that it's possible to get something like a postcard printed when you're on a budget or want to start printing independently. I do highly recommend you invest in a professional level printer if you want to start a business with your art. Creating a high quality print is very important when you're selling them. If you're printing from home, it's always a good idea to buy paper that works best with your printer. I'd get something sturdy. A medium weight paper is good if you have it. Something that is semi-glossy or matte is good too. I have an HP inkjet printer. Inkjet is the way to go. You'll get more vibrant colors and the ink doesn't fade as fast over time. I suggest just experimenting with it a little bit and have fun. Maybe in the future I will make another video going more in depth into how I sometimes print from home. Getting it printed online is probably the easiest thing to do if you don't have the best printer. You'll get a higher quality print with a lot less work. Once you have your drawing on Photoshop, I suggest you double check the bleed lines and the pixel dimensions. When you export in a JPEG or a PNG file, making sure the DPI is still at 300. If you're planning on posting something like this on your social media, I highly recommend saving a second version that is at a lower DPI, 144 DPI or 72. And also change the pixel size so the minimum is at least 1000 pixels wide. I know that some platforms already compress files, but this is an extra level of protection from someone online trying to steal your work and reprinting them. If they are going to steal, at least they'll have a lower quality version. Obviously, when you're sending these out to be printed for yourself, make sure to send them the correct one. So yeah, that's about it. I decided to go with the online method, so I sent my files out and waited a couple days for these to come in. I hope this video was helpful to you and you learned something new. I started this channel a year ago, and since then I think making these silly little videos really helped me feel more motivated to draw and share my work. I know I haven't posted too much this year, but I really do appreciate those who stuck around, liked my videos, commented, or subscribed. You guys really are the best. My plan for next year is to try and get a video out once a month or even twice a month. If I don't get too busy, who knows? I'm just excited to continue to learn and make better quality videos for you guys. Have a good end of the year, and I will see you in the next video.